Good morning. My name is Eli Howes. Can you please tell me your full name?
My name is Diyorbek.
And what should I call you?
You can call me Diyorbek.
So, Diyorbek, in this first part, I'd like to ask you some questions about yourself. Let's first of all talk about where you live. Do you live in a large city or a small town?
I live in the capital of Uzbekistan, Tashkent, and Tashkent is a major city, and I've been living here for the better part of 6 years.
Do you think you'd like to live here for the rest of your life?
Probably no. I don't see myself living in Tashkent simply because I have plans to immigrate to a different country.
And what do you like most about living in this city?
I like the fact that we have an integrated transport system in Tashkent. So there's a metro. There are I guess frequent buses too, and it usually I get to the destination I want quite easily.
Let's move on. Let's talk about cooking. Do you like cooking?
Um, I don't do the cooking myself, so I cannot say that I really enjoy cooking. But if I can scramble eggs, so I can do basic things, so I can make a quick sandwich, but I don't particularly enjoy cooking.
Would you like to learn how to cook?
Yeah, I lived in the US for about 3.5 months, and I had to learn how to cook. But I most of my cooking instruction I got it from YouTube videos, and I would love to go to cookery lessons and learn how to cook better because I might end up living on my own again. So it would be a useful skill to have.
Mm. And who normally does the cooking in your family?
Normally, again, it does depends on the occasion. Like every now and then, it's my dad who takes up the reins in the kitchen. In that, he wants to do, our national pilaf. It's a staple food. It's like pilaf. It's a thing in Central Asia, in Pakistan, and all those countries. And he usually does the cooking in special occasions. But in most other tests, it just depends on who is, not busy, and then that person usually does the cooking in the family.
Is the national food from your country considered easy or difficult to cook?
I don't think like what is considered national Uzbek cuisine is easy to cook, but like particularly pilaf, the one I mentioned, is difficult to cook. And then there are different varieties of this kind of food.
Mm.
And like I mean, in Uzbekistan alone, there are I don't know, God knows how many varieties of pilaf, and I don't think it's easy to make this kind of food.
Mm. Let's move on. Let's talk about puzzles. Did you like doing puzzles when you were a kid?
I remember I did some puzzles like Sudoku or like word puzzles, but I quite recently, for example, I also did a very popular internet puzzle like Wordle, I guess. So yeah, so it's a I guess New York Times web-based puzzle. So I did enjoy doing puzzles when I was a child.
Mm. And when do you do puzzles these days? During trips or when you feel bored?
I usually do puzzles when I'm taking trips to my hometown in LA. So it's a 6 hour ride, and I usually don't have internet connection, so I can do puzzles when I'm on the way to hometown.
And do you prefer doing word puzzles or number-based puzzles?
I guess I've got a good mathematical brain, so I like to do word like number puzzles more than word puzzles. But I would say my vocabulary is quite broad too, so I wouldn't mind doing word puzzles too.
Do you think it's good for old people to do puzzles?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a stereotypical thing to say that, like, I mean, it's quite common, old people to be doing, puzzles of different kinds. They usually, I think, yeah, they do word puzzles quite often, I guess.
Hmm. Okay, so we're going to move on to part two. And in this part, I'm going to ask you, or I'm going to give you a topic, and I'd like you to talk about it for 1 to 2 minutes. Before you talk, you'll have 1 minute to think about what you're going to say, and you can make some notes if you wish. Do you understand?
Yes.
All right. Remember, you have 1 to 2 minutes for this, so don't worry if I stop you. I'll tell you when the time is up. Can you start speaking now, please?
Yes, I believe there are many people who are making meaningful contributions to the advancement of society, and I think this person doesn't actually create anything. So, like people probably would, think of Elon Musk as being responsible for creating a lot of things, but I don't think this person is doing particularly positive. I don't think one person is capable of doing. He might be just an image who's taking all the credit. But there's one person I admire a lot, and that person is Lex Fridman. Lex Fridman is a podcaster whose communication skills, I would say, second to none. Especially recently, he's made a huge progress in the way he asks questions, and then I would say his podcasting skills. I mean, the way he asks questions and the way he's able to listen to people and again make meaningful conversation has increased dramatically. And I also would say that this person makes contribution to society by allowing us to listen to the points of view of other people who might be different from us. So he invites people from all walks of life. He invites musical producers, he invites scientists, he invites politicians, and I would say he has changed the discourse in so many ways. So now we are able to better understand the science. We're able to understand um, all sorts of people, and also he has got a lot of guests who engage in philosophy. So I particularly enjoy watching his YouTube videos where he has got a philosopher as a guest. So I think he every now and then could be going viral on Twitter because he invites some people that other people consider that should not be given platform. But he wants to talk to people from both, both aisles or both.
I'm just going to stop you there. You've spoken for 2 minutes. Have you told many other people about him and his podcast?
Yes, I usually talk about him in my classroom. So I talk about him because I think he particularly is not the most animated speaker, honestly, but the way he is able to ask thought-provoking questions makes me recommend him to other people.
All right, thank you very much. So we've been talking about a person who has made a large contribution to society. I'd like to discuss with you one or two more general questions related to this. So let's consider, first of all, how individuals can contribute to society. So definitely, if you have a large social media platform or you have your own podcast, it's very easy to make a very large contribution to society. How can people make a contribution to society if they're not so well known or they don't have a large social media following?
Oh, yeah. I don't think contribution should come like just in the form of creating something. So contribution could come in the form of being a responsible, law-abiding citizen. But again, there has to be a limit, and then we need to engage in discourse, and we need to make good choices. For example, I think people need to try to, for example, reduce their carbon footprint, and then that's good for the environment. So you can make minor changes in your lifestyle, and that could help the environment. Or you could, stop something bad from happening. So these kinds of small things make you, I would say, a good person and a good member of society.
Mm. And how can we become aware of where to put our energy and what things that we can do to become better people?
I think to be a better person, now we need to look at where the world is headed. And for example, definitely the fact that the world is getting hotter. Speaking of environmental, problems, concerns that the world is dealing with, I would say that's something people can do to reduce their carbon footprint and then to try to drive more environmentally friendly vehicles. So like maybe if they can afford, they can buy electric vehicles. But as people, I think to be a better people, we need to just generally make good choices
Yeah.
that do not harm others.
And how do we know which are the good choices to make? So certainly when it comes to the environment, we can read about how the devastating effect that we're having on the environment in newspapers and magazines. But can we rely, for example, on the government to tell us how to be good people, or should we look at philosophy for how to be good people? Where can we
Oh,
get?
well, I would say the government is definitely not something that we need to listen to. They'll definitely push their own agenda. So, for example, if you're looking at, like, in the name of, for example, lockdowns, I particularly don't approve that what's happening in the world, especially what's going on in China, putting a lot of millions of people into lockdowns. I don't approve that. I think what we need to do, we need to like probably consult some philosophical like literature, and then people generally need to engage in deep deliberation. So if they're engaging in deep deliberation, philosophical deliberation, I'm sure they could ask questions about virtue, where virtue comes from, how do I become a good person? And asking all of these simple questions, I'm sure, leads to better answers and makes them good people.
Mm. Well, let's move on slightly, and let's touch back on to doing good for the environment. So you mentioned that one thing that we can certainly do is to be conscious of our effect on the environment. And when it comes to how to take action to make the environment better, does that responsibility fall onto the government, onto companies, or does it fall onto individuals?
I would say governments definitely should be held accountable to fix the problem. So they should be held accountable because they have legislative power. So they could introduce laws. So they could set a limit for industries that release more greenhouse gases than others. So they could particularly tax coal industry or oil industry more than others. And they also punish and fine heavily the industries that are breaking those rules. And individuals also can make minor changes, but those minor changes, I don't think, amount to something big. Although they tell us we should not eat meat, we should adopt a vegetarian lifestyle and all that jazz. I don't think this. I just believe that they're just evading the responsibility. I believe at the end of the day, government should be held accountable.
All right, thank you very much. That is the end of the speaking test. Wow, what a speaking test.
Yes, I guess what is the word? I was getting into gear at the end of the test compared to the beginning, I believe.
Right, yeah, yeah. Certainly, the level just kind of kept on getting better and better throughout the
Yeah,
entire
yeah.
test. Very impressive. And I know that you've got a band 9 before in IELTS speaking.
Yes, in my
And
August
now
exam, I
I
got
can
the
really see why. An incredibly impressive speaking test.
Yeah, thank you. I think, yeah, in my August exam, I ended up getting a 9 for speaking, and I guess it just depends on the questions. I guess I had a question probably that I felt particularly passionate about, that I know more about. But generally speaking, yeah, I think it was a good feeling to see, like, that I finally scored 9 in speaking.
Yeah. Can you remember what was the topic that when you saw the topic you thought, yes?
Yeah, it was an easy question. It was a question about a person I spend most time with, and and then we generally talked about personalities and what kind of factors enter into people's mind when they're choosing friends, and also what affects people's personalities. We talked about stuff like that.
Sounds like maybe an easier test than this one when you were discussing
Yeah,
what makes us a good human. Much more
yeah, that's a bit
philosophical and complex.
philosophical.
So I was wondering because I know that you teach as well. You've got a very large Telegram following, a YouTube following, and a website as well. And I was wondering if you could kind of share some of your kind of tips and tricks that have helped you get such a high score. So perhaps, well, for those people listening, I believe you've got a 9 in speaking before, you've got a 9 in listening and reading, and you've got a band 8 in writing. So I'd like to ask you about all the different parts of the test. So maybe we could start with the speaking test because people have just watched you in the speaking test. Are there any tips that you would like to share?
Yes, for speaking, I would say input is number one thing. I believe a lot of people start worrying too early about making output. They want to start immediately. I think that has to do with the fact that there are so many polyglots who tell you that you need to start speaking from the get-go. But I believe you start speaking only after you've got enough input. So one thing that I would definitely recommend is expose yourself to native speaker, material. So where native speakers are talking about different things as much as possible. So the kind of language I picked up was picked up from the podcasts I listened to, from the movies I watch. So generally, that's something generally you can do. But it's something specific you can do to improve your IELTS speaking is watching, IELTS speaking interviews like the ones you do. Like I always recommend your interviews, particularly the ones that you do with Connor. Those are really good, and that there is lots of good language. And then preparing for common IELTS topics. I believe, for example, you should not go into the exam room without having answers about what you like to do in your free time, or where you live, or what kind of work do you do. Those common questions, they're always there, and you definitely need to have answers, good answers for those questions.
And sometimes, even though those questions are very common, if you've never tried to answer them, sometimes they're quite complex. Like, what do you like most about where you live? If you've never really thought about that and you get asked
Yes.
that in a speaking test, it can
Truth be
actually
told,
stun you slightly.
I find some of the part one questions quite difficult to answer because they're so simple and at the same time. So, I mean, some of the part one questions, if I'm honest, to me seem childish. You would ask these same questions from a child, and that could be difficult to answer. That's why I think you need to put in some time to prepare for those questions.
I remember one particular question that I had to ask to students preparing for the IELTS exam that I always found very childish is, do you have a favorite pair of shoes? And every time I would ask that question, I'd slightly kind of wince a little bit because I felt like it was a very childish question. But yeah, I guess that the part one questions are designed to be a bit like that, kind of supposedly
Oh,
simple and everyday topics, again,
yeah.
supposedly. But yeah, so great. And I've actually, not to plug my own channel too much, but I've got a video where I look at the top most commonly asked questions in part one of the speaking test. So perhaps people can watch that video if they want to know the common topics that appear in IELTS speaking.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. Any last tips you'd like to share on IELTS speaking, or should we move on to the writing?
Yeah, while speaking, I think the number one thing is to be natural. So you just I think for me, I think in the examiner's line, you tell me if I'm right. There are two scores, 5.5 and 7. Anything above 7 is natural. Anything below 5.5 is not, it's not easy to understand. So I think they, for most people, end up getting 5.5, 6, and 6.5. So the focus, I think, has to be on sounding natural. So just try to sound natural and ask yourself, is that how a native speaker put what I'm trying to describe?
So that was one thing that I was really impressed with your speaking test, the one that we've just done. You sounded incredibly natural. There were some questions where you just gave a very nice kind of short answer because that's your true answer. And there were other times when you really elaborated on your answer. I liked even that you spoke about one of your favorite podcasts in part two as well. That was a very
Yeah.
natural response rather than maybe some public figure in your country who you've revised for. So from the entire test that we did today, I got the sense that I was speaking to the real you, which examiners will
Yes,
definitely respond well to.
definitely. Yeah.
Yes. So IELTS writing, you got band 8, which is absolutely incredible. I really very rarely come across people that get band 8 in IELTS writing. Did you do was it the academic or the general?
Yeah, I did academic IELTS.
Right. Okay. So I've spoken to very few people who have gotten band 8 in the academic IELTS. Usually it's the general IELTS that people get band 8 in. So
Yeah.
would you like to share some tips for that?
I would say for academic IELTS, most of people's test takers' energy is channeled into task two more than task one. Rightly so, because task two is more important than task one. But I think it could well be the case that your task one score might be, dragging your overall score down. So you might be spending less time on preparing for task one. For me, particularly, it was the case that I was ending up spending too much time on task two, and I was writing a lot of essays. And I noticed that it was my task one that needed some work. And so I believe number one thing to do is to get to know the band descriptors, publicly available band descriptors. For example, for task one, if you don't have an overview, that's immediate 5 for task achievement. And it's important that you choose good key features, and you get, like, I don't want to go into the details of what band descriptors have to say about each aspect, but you want to get to know the band descriptors. And I believe task one is particularly it requires particular skill set. And whereas we've done anything like something similar to essay writing, because we listen to podcasts and we discuss all of those IELTS task two ideas every now and then, and we probably discuss those topics almost daily. Whereas we don't do something similar to task one. And so I think you need to work on working with the numbers and then selecting key features, and that requires particular skill set, and that, I guess, you develop it over time.
Yeah, that's spot on. You're exactly right. I mean, when was the last time we've looked at a process diagram or a bar chart
Yes.
and actually tried to work out what the overview is and how to communicate that? Probably never in our lives until the IELTS test. And one thing I'd like to ask you, so in task one it says write at least 150 words, task two it says write at least 250 words. Can you remember roughly how long your task one and task two answers were?
Yes, my task one was about 300 words long, I believe, and my task two was more than 400 words long. And my game plan was to go into the test room and finish both tasks in 40 minutes. And then within the remaining 20 minutes, I wanted to edit it aggressively. Like, leave no mistakes for the examiner in terms of word choice, in terms of punctuation, in terms of anything. But I kind of achieved, because I had 13 minutes for proofreading, editing, and in my exam when I got 8 for writing, I was able to spend 13 minutes for editing. And so, because I wrote quite like long essays and reports, so that's why I needed to edit. And definitely I found a lot of typos, like spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes, and I edited them and corrected them.
Such a clever idea to give yourself so much time to look through your writing. And it's amazing also that it says write at least 150 words for task one, and you wrote 300 words. I've seen that a lot of the time when people are getting band 7.5, band 8, band 9, really high scores for task one, they're writing well beyond 150 words. I had some IELTS expert teachers write some task one answers, and I gave them 20 minutes for task one, and they all wrote they all wrote over 250 words. I think quite a few of them were well over 300 words even, which just goes to show that a lot of teachers out there say, hey, it should only be 10% more. So maybe you can write 165 words, but don't go beyond that. And you realize that, well, that's kind of rubbish, because the experts, the expert teachers, experts like you and people that can score incredibly high are actually writing so much more than 150 words to get the scores they need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of, yeah, when you think about it, it's actually kind of a little bit unfair, like, because I don't want students to assume, those who are watching us, that the more words you write, the higher score you end up getting. But it's all about the quality of writing when you write long. So are you like, because what you end up doing, you end up making comparisons, and comparisons are really important, because if you look at the task, it says summarize the information by selecting, reporting the key features, and make comparisons where relevant. And when you make decent comparisons, and your word count ends up going to like 200 words probably.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and especially if you get one of these like line graphs with loads of
Yeah.
data, You're just like, oh dear, I'm gonna have to write a lot. Here we go.
Yes.
Let's move on now to IELTS reading. Any tips that you'd like to share for IELTS reading?
Yes, for IELTS reading, the number one thing is to get to know the test format. So to know types of questions. For example, in passage one, you usually have a descriptive passage and usually related to history. And you want to know, and then you want to know what types of questions you have usually in passage one. And altogether, I believe there are more than 15 types of questions. So like 10 to 15 questions, you want to get to know all of those types of questions so that you know, for example, the difference between false and not given. Like just to give an example, you know how matching headings questions work. You know what multiple choice questions are checking. So once you know different types of questions, it's all about, again, input, exposing yourself to IELTS like passages and reading a lot of IELTS like articles. And if you go to any Cambridge official Cambridge book, at the acknowledgements page, they write where they got the passages from, where they adapted them from. And then you could read those websites so that you exposing yourself to that kind of material more. So you are reading history articles. You are IELTS has a lot of scientific articles, and you are reading a lot of science related articles.
That's a great idea. So do you think it's better for the people to go and read those articles rather than to do lots and lots of practice tests?
I believe so. Yes, I believe that it's important that you read more than you do practice tests. Do the practice tests at the weekends, probably. So you do them at the weekends. You do a full test, but throughout the week, you only probably do a passage a day, not like the whole test, not the entire test. But you are instead increasing your vocabulary range in learning words, and you are, generally exposing yourself to that kind of material.
Yeah, it's true. Because when you're reading, you're definitely improving your reading skills. But like you said, you're also learning vocabulary that you can use in the speaking and the writing test.
Exactly.
And then you're generally going to be getting a lot faster at reading as well, which is going to help a lot. And I know that your YouTube channel has got great reading resources, IELTS reading resources, where you take
Yes.
people through all of the questions and types, and also through actual exams. Is that right?
Yes, on my YouTube channel, it's called Diyorbek Standardized Test, Diyorbek/Standardized Test. Like if you search for Diyorbek's IELTS, you find it. And I made video walkthroughs for all Cambridge books, starting from Cambridge 6 to Cambridge 13. So you do any passage, and you can find a video walkthrough. That actually helped me immensely, because we know that teaching, as I was making these videos, I definitely improved my own reading, and that helped a lot. Uh, that helped definitely. And another thing that I do on my channel, I also, by the way, because earlier I talked about getting to know different types of questions, and in the channel I have question types course too. I explained the intricacies of all types of questions and what you need to know. For example, short answer questions, they check if you can find a specific detail, then they always follow order. So I tell anything specific that you need to know about each type of question in the video course. So you can find all of them in my channel.
No, that's great. So if someone wanted to study with you, do you mainly help people with the IELTS writing, with the IELTS speaking, with the IELTS listening, or IELTS reading, or do you help people with every aspect of IELTS?
I teach 4 skill courses here in Tashkent, in my own education center. So I actually opened it this year. But in my lessons, there is a greater emphasis on reading and writing more than the other 2 skills. I guess I end up focusing first on writing, then reading, and then speaking, and then listening, because I believe writing is the section that students need most help with. And then reading as well. Reading requires certain academic skills, so I tend to help with reading too. Like we do a lot of analysis, we do a lot of reading from different publications, and then speaking, obviously. But I believe listening is part of the exam. You need least academic, skills probably. So you don't really. You need to definitely be practicing, but there's not anything academic. It's either understand or don't understand.
Yeah, so I feel like the two things it tests in abundance are vocabulary and concentration skills.
Yes, those two definitely. And
Um,
I don't think you can help as a teacher to help them concentrate.
yeah, I often found when I was teaching in classrooms, when it came to listening, I didn't really have very much to help the students with. It was just a case of pressing play on the recorder, then pressing pause, then pressing rewind. And I felt
Yeah.
kind of more like a machine than a teacher. Mm.
Yes.
And I know, so I often get a lot of emails saying, Eli, do you have a Telegram channel? And I don't have a Telegram channel, but I know that you do. Is that something that international people can join, or is that primarily for people in
Yes,
Uzbekistan?
yes, they can definitely join. So if they go to Telegram and search on global search Diyorbek's IELTS, and then they can find my Telegram channel where I share a lot of content related to IELTS. And yeah, I think Telegram is my main source of communication with people wanting to take my courses, or in generally looking for IELTS advice.
Great. Yeah, if you could send me those links, what I'll do is I'll put them in the description below this video so people can find out all
Okay,
about it.
thank you. Yeah, I'll be doing so.
Great. So once again, thank you so much for coming on. It was a real pleasure to do the speaking test with you.
Thank
I'm
you.
really
Thank you.
looking
It was
forward
a
to
pleasure.
editing
It was a
this,
pleasure
and
to do this with you.
I'll put the subtitles down here, all the great vocabulary up there. I was already kind of keeping a mental note of all the vocabulary that I'm excited to put up there because a lot of phrases that I haven't really heard other candidates say in speaking tests, but really high level vocabulary and used very appropriately. So people watching this are going to be able to get a lot of nuggets of wisdom and a lot of good vocabulary from this test.
Hopefully they find it useful.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, Diyorbek, and bye then.
Thank you.